When Marvel first announced Captain Marvel, expectations were high. This was going to be the MCU's first female-led superhero film, a symbolic milestone and a crucial bridge between Infinity War and Endgame. The studio marketed Carol Danvers as the new face of the franchise, someone who could step into Tony Stark's shoes and carry the torch. But what was supposed to be Marvel's triumphant evolution instead turned into one of its most divisive experiments. Even before the film premiered, the warning signs were there. Early trailers highlighted Carol as stoic and restrained, but many fans interpreted that as flat or robotic compared to the natural charisma of characters like Tony Stark or Thor. By release day, those impressions had hardened. Viewers criticized Larson's performance as wooden, arguing she lacked the emotional range to make Captain Marvel relatable. Some felt she was overpowered without having earned the audience's investment, a sharp contrast to heroes like Steve Rogers who had years of development before becoming larger than life. Then came the off-screen controversies. During press tours, Larson made comments pushing for more diversity in Hollywood and film criticism. While her message resonated with some, soundbites circulated online that painted her as confrontational or dismissive of male critics. In the social media echo chamber, those quotes snowballed into hostility, fueling campaigns to review bomb the film on Rotten Tomatoes before it even opened. Financially, the film looked like a success, crossing the billion-dollar mark worldwide, but the numbers didn't erase the perception problem. For many fans, Captain Marvel felt like Marvel trying to manufacture a symbol rather than letting a character grow organically. And the follow-up only deepened the rift. The Marvels 2023 entered theaters with the lowest MCU opening weekend ever and plummeted in its second week, cementing Captain Marvel as one of the franchise's weakest links. Even Endgame wasn't safe from the backlash. Larson's sudden arrival as a powerhouse who nearly single-handedly beat Thanos left some fans frustrated, seeing it as forced rather than earned. For others, it reinforced the sense that Marvel was pushing her character without listening to audience reception. It's like Marvel showed up to the party with a $1 billion cake, but half the guests still complained it tasted like cardboard. In 2008, Marvel Studios was not the cinematic juggernaut it is today. The company was gambling its future on Iron Man, a character who wasn't exactly a household name outside of comic book circles. To make things riskier, they chose Robert Downey Jr. for the lead, a decision that, at the time, was seen as reckless. Downey's career had been overshadowed by substance abuse problems and multiple arrests. For executives, casting him was less safe bet and more, are you trying to tank the company? But director Jon Favreau insisted he was perfect. Downey's real-life redemption arc mirrored Tony Stark's journey too closely to ignore. From the opening moments of Iron Man, the gamble paid off. Downey infused Stark with quick wit, arrogance, and just enough vulnerability to make audiences root for him. He didn't play Tony Stark as a flawless genius. He played him as a brilliant mess, a man whose flaws were just as captivating as his strengths. Suddenly, a B-list Marvel character was leading the birth of an entire cinematic universe. What made Downey's performance beloved wasn't just the one-liners or the flashy tech. It was the humanity underneath. Stark's battles with ego, his guilt over weapons dealing, and his desire to do better connected with audiences on a personal level. Over the years, his character evolved from selfish playboy to selfless protector, and fans grew with him every step of the way. His chemistry with the rest of the Avengers only deepened that bond, whether sparring verbally with Steve Rogers, acting as a mentor to Peter Parker, or clashing with Bruce Banner. Downey brought electricity to every scene. The MCU's massive crossover events all orbited around him, making him not just the face of the franchise, but its emotional anchor. And then came Endgame. After more than a decade, Downey's final act hit like a punch to the chest. His sacrifice wasn't just a plot point, it was a culmination of 11 years of storytelling and audience investment. When he delivered the line, "I am Iron Man," entire theaters went silent before erupting into tears and applause. Few actors ever get that kind of send-off. Imagine going from that guy in court again to the guy who literally privatized world peace. Talk about career glow-ups. Disney should have given him stock options instead of just a paycheck. When Spider-Man 3 was announced in 2007, fans had one request: bring Venom to the big screen. As one of Spider-Man's most iconic villains, Venom was dark, brutal, and physically imposing, the kind of character who could raise the stakes higher than ever before. But when Sony revealed Topher Grace as Eddie Brock, the excitement instantly turned to confusion. Grace was best known for playing the sarcastic, skinny neighbor kid on That 70s Show. Casting him as Venom felt like trying to convince people that a balloon animal was actually a pit bull. The problem wasn't just appearance. Venom in the comics was built like a tank, a rival who could go toe-to-toe with Spider-Man physically as well as psychologically. Grace's version came off whiny, shallow, and more annoying than intimidating. Instead of being Spider-Man's deadliest foe, this Venom looked and acted like Peter Parker's jealous roommate. It was as if the studio forgot Venom was supposed to terrify audiences, not make them wonder if he needed a hug. And then there was the story itself. Spider-Man 3 was already buckling under the weight of too many villains. Between Sandman's redemption arc, Harry Osborn's revenge, and Peter Parker's symbiote phase, there was barely room for Venom to exist, let alone dominate. Director Sam Raimi had never even wanted Venom in the movie, openly saying he didn't connect with the character. The studio forced him in, which meant Venom's presence was rushed, shallow, and ultimately wasted. By the time Eddie Brock bonded with the symbiote, it felt like an afterthought instead of the climax fans had waited decades for. Audiences weren't forgiving. Grace's Eddie Brock has since become a case study in miscasting, often cited in discussions of how a poor fit between actor and role can sink even the most anticipated villain. Critics and fans alike tore into the portrayal, pointing out that the character who was supposed to embody Spider-Man's darkest mirror instead looked like Peter Parker's sarcastic cousin who stole his hoodie. It took over a decade and Tom Hardy's reboot for fans to finally see a version of Venom that lived up to the character's menacing reputation. Hardy brought the physicality, the grit, and the chaos that the symbiote demanded. In contrast, Grace's performance aged poorly, becoming less underrated over time and more what were they thinking? Watching Topher Grace try to be Venom was like watching a Chihuahua audition for the role of Cujo. Cute, but you're not scaring anybody. When Hugh Jackman was first announced as Wolverine in 2000's X-Men, fans weren't convinced. The comic book Wolverine was a short, scrappy brawler built like a feral tank. Jackman, on the other hand, was a tall, clean-cut Australian actor barely known outside theater. The casting seemed off. But the second he stepped on screen with claws extended and that mix of raw intensity and wounded vulnerability, the doubts evaporated. Jackman captured Wolverine's contradictions perfectly. He was both savage and sympathetic, animalistic yet deeply human. He growled and slashed with primal rage, but behind it was a broken man searching for belonging. It was this balance that made him stand out from the very beginning. By the time X2 and X-Men The Last Stand rolled around, Wolverine wasn't just another member of the team. He was the face of the entire franchise. What cemented his legacy was endurance. For 17 years, through reboots, prequels, and spin-offs, Jackman remained Wolverine, no matter how messy the scripts got. X-Men Origins Wolverine still gives fans nightmares. His performance elevated the material. While other superhero actors came and went, Jackman stayed, evolving with the character and deepening the bond with audiences. Then came Logan in 2017. Stripped of the flashy costumes and comic book spectacle, it was a raw, brutal, and emotional farewell. Jackman's performance turned what could have been a standard superhero send-off into one of the genre's greatest achievements. Critics and fans praised Logan not just as an excellent comic book film, but as a powerful piece of cinema in its own right. The vulnerability he brought to an older, wary Wolverine resonated in a way no other performance in the genre had before. 17 years in the same role is enough to wear out most actors, but Jackman's Wolverine never felt stale. Instead, each return felt like a gift, a chance to see an actor embodying a character so completely that the line between the two blurred. Even now, with his return in Deadpool 3 on the horizon, fans aren't asking, why bring him back? They're asking, how fast can we get tickets? Let's be honest, Hugh Jackman is so tied to Wolverine that if anyone else tries to play the role, fans will riot harder than Comic-Con attendees who discover the free merch table is out of t-shirts. Back in 2003, long before the MCU redefined superhero films, Fox released Daredevil with Ben Affleck in the lead. On paper, it seemed like a reasonable match, a big-name actor taking on a darker, more brooding Marvel hero. In execution, however, Affleck's Daredevil quickly became one of the most criticized Marvel castings of the early 2000s. The biggest issue was tone. Affleck's performance felt flat, as though he couldn't decide whether Matt Murdock was supposed to be tortured and serious or campy and over the top. The movie leaned heavily into cliches, slow-motion fight scenes, forced romance with Elektra, and melodramatic dialogue that left little room for subtlety. Instead of giving audiences a gritty, grounded, street-level hero, the film came across as unintentionally cartoonish. Affleck himself later admitted he regretted the role, calling Daredevil one of his career missteps. Fans agreed. His version of Matt Murdock lacked the complexity that made the character beloved in the comics, a blind lawyer balancing Catholic guilt, personal trauma, and vigilante justice. What they got instead was a bland action figure in a leather suit. Even the costume became a point of ridicule, with its shiny red leather looking more like a rejected biker outfit than an iconic superhero uniform. The poor reception wasn't just about Affleck though. The film itself was weighed down by sloppy writing, uneven pacing, and some questionable editing choices. The director's cut, released later, was considered an improvement, but by then the damage was done. Ben Affleck was the face of the movie. He became the lightning rod for its failure. For years, Ben Affleck as Daredevil was shorthand for bad superhero casting, mentioned in the same breath as George Clooney's Batman. It wasn't until Charlie Cox took over the role in Netflix's Daredevil series that fans finally felt justice had been done. His nuanced, layered performance only highlighted how miscast Affleck had been in comparison. Looking back, Affleck's Daredevil was less the man without fear and more the man without direction. Ben Affleck as Daredevil was proof that even superheroes can stumble in the dark and not in the cool ninja way. By the time Marvel introduced Tom Holland in Captain America Civil War 2016, audiences had already lived through two different Spider-Man eras. Tobey Maguire had defined the role for a generation, awkwardly lovable and deeply earnest. Andrew Garfield brought a sharper, quippier edge. Though his series ended abruptly after only 2 films, when Marvel and Sony announced a third Spider-Man, many fans were exhausted by the idea of yet another reboot. But Holland's arrival changed everything almost instantly. From his very first appearance, Peter Parker nervously babbling while being recruited by Tony Stark, Holland captured what made Spider-Man so beloved in the comics: youth. Unlike Maguire or Garfield, Holland actually looked and acted like a high school kid. His mix of nervous energy, awkward humor, and wide-eyed amazement sold the idea of a teenager suddenly handed world-shaking responsibilities. Audiences connected to him not because he was the most powerful hero in the room, but because he wasn't ready for any of it. In Spider-Man Homecoming 2017, Holland carried his first solo outing with the same balance of humor and heart. His Peter Parker stumbled through mistakes, relied too much on his Stark-designed suit, and had to learn that being a hero was about choices, not gadgets. That growth mirrored the original comic book ethos. With great power comes great responsibility. It was a Spider-Man story grounded in teenage anxiety, not just superhero spectacle. Holland's emotional depth became even clearer in the crossover films. In Infinity War, his panic farewell to Tony Stark, "I don't want to go," was improvised, and it broke theaters worldwide. In Endgame, his reunion with Tony highlighted how central their bond had become, adding layers of tragedy to Stark's sacrifice. Holland managed to be both comic relief and emotional anchor, a rare balance that kept audiences invested. But it was Spider-Man No Way Home 2021 that cemented his legacy. Facing villains pulled from past franchises, Holland delivered a performance that pushed his Peter Parker into true adulthood. The death of Aunt May forced him to confront the cost of heroism in a way he never had before. By the finale, when Peter chose to have the world forget who he was, fans saw Spider-Man stepping into the loneliness and sacrifice that defined the character at his core. It was the kind of maturity arc that elevated Holland beyond the young Spider-Man and into a definitive version of the hero. The film's multiverse reunion also reminded audiences how much affection still existed for Maguire and Garfield. Instead of being overshadowed, Holland stood tall alongside them, proving his place among Spider-Man's cinematic lineage. The fact that fans embrace all three actors in the same movie without rejecting Holland speaks volumes about how beloved his take has become. Today, Holland is widely regarded as one of Marvel's best casting decisions. His Peter Parker feels authentic, layered, and endlessly relatable. And with his MCU journey far from over, he represents not just the future of Spider-Man, but a promise that Marvel still knows how to get casting right when it matters most. Holland nails Spider-Man so perfectly that if Marvel ever recasts again, fans might actually swing into the studio with pitchforks and web shooters.